Welcome to today's Expert Chat. I'm Ginny with the Understood team, and today we'll be talking about executive function and the brain. With us today is Stephanie Carlson, Dr. Stephanie Carlson, who is the Distinguished McKnight University Professor at the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Stephanie. How are you today?
I'm well, Ginny. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here today. And before we get started, I'd love for you to tell our viewers a little bit more about your background, Stephanie.
Okay, sure. So I'm a professor at the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota, where we specialize in child psychology and child development. And my research is on executive function that we're going to be talking about today, and things related to it, such as play and theory of mind. I'm also CEO of Reflection Sciences, which is a company that provides resources and assessment tools for executive function.
Okay, great. And just before we get started, I want to tell our viewers that Stephanie will be taking your questions throughout the chat. Just type them into the chat box and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So just to get started, Stephanie, let's just talk about what is executive function, and is it really all about self-control?
Great. So executive function refers to the brain basis of self-control. So it involves a number of neurocognitive processes that we've come to understand quite a bit about in terms of its brain basis. But is it all about self-control? Not really. So, I mean, good self-control is an outcome, a visible outcome of good executive function skills. But really, a lot more is involved than just self-control.
So what are the components then of executive functioning, Stephanie?
Right. So researchers talk about there being three main facets of executive function that kind of work together in concert with one another. So one facet is working memory. So this is the ability to hold information in mind and work with it. So if you're trying to remember a phone number that you just learned, for example, you're using your working memory skills, maybe rehearsing it in your mind. Or if you learn a new way of playing a game, you're updating the information that you had. And you're going to use your working memory to tell yourself, oh, wait, this is a new way to play this game. I need to remind myself of the new way. So that's one facet. And there are kind of storage limitations in the brain and mind in terms of how much information we can hold in short-term memory and in order to work with it. And that storage limitation gets better with age. It grows. The capacity grows with age in the early years, up to a certain point when, even the best of us just can't remember, 10 digits in a row that we just heard for the first time.
Okay, great. So that's working memory.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then a second facet is inhibitory control. So this is the aspect of executive function that we think of as being most closely associated with self-control. So this is controlling your impulses, resisting temptation, resisting distractions. So staying on task in the face of a lot of distractions. If you think about the classic marshmallow test, kind of resisting eating that marshmallow and instead following the rule to wait in order to get more marshmallows. That's using your inhibitory control. And the third facet is cognitive flexibility, or sometimes it's called mental shifting. And this is the ability to shift flexibly between different ways of viewing a problem or different perspectives on a situation. And it's required in order to learn a new way of solving a problem or to get unstuck from a particular way of viewing things or to break a habit. You need to think flexibly, remind yourself of what your new goal is, resist temptations or distractions to stay on task and keep that goal in mind at the top of your working memory, if you will. And then to be able to shift flexibly and think and do things differently from how you normally would do them.
So are we born with executive functioning skills, or are we a blank slate when it comes to executive function skills, and do they just develop, and how do they develop?
Well, we're still actually learning a lot about the very early beginnings or antecedents of executive function in infancy. I think it's fair to say that that babies are born prepared to develop executive function skills. And some of the very early beginnings would be things like just the ability to detect patterns. So infants in the first months of life become really good little pattern detectors. So starting to notice what things go with what. Starting to notice sequences of events, like, first mother does this, and then usually this follows next. First mother warms a bottle, usually that means the bottle's coming next. Mm-hmm. Starting to put these things together and start to kind of see how sequences or patterns go together. And then from there, you start to notice when a pattern gets violated and when something unexpected happens or surprising happens. And that's really the beginning of a very early form of reflection. So it's not yet perhaps an articulated, and certainly not a verbal. Infants can't verbalize this, but they're starting to notice when things that they were expecting are no longer happening, and that can foster or prompt a sense of maybe things aren't always that way, the way that I thought it was. Maybe rules can be broken. Maybe things or patterns can work differently. So I think that's one very early beginning of starting to reflect on your thoughts, actions, and feelings. And that's really the basis of executive function. I am speculating about these very early beginnings of it. Another very early beginning might be picking up, again, as part of pattern detection, but learning serve and return. So serve and return is what we mean by a caregiver talking, maybe cooing to a baby, and then the baby responding in turn. This is actually setting up a little bit of a pattern, but it's also a social and dynamic one that is setting the stage for language and also setting the stage for executive function skills.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Stephanie, for explaining that so well. We have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to go right to them, Stephanie. I want to try to get to as many as possible. Sam asks for recommendations to teach students about their brains and their brain plasticity. Would this be something you might have a recommendation for, Stephanie?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know the age of the students, but even preschoolers, it's not too early to teach them about their brains and how their brains are working, and sometimes not working so well. And helping them to reflect on their own failures of executive function, if you will, and starting to think about that in terms of the brain. I think that could be a helpful way to start thinking about your own and other people's executive function skills, even starting in preschool. I think, when we make an error or a mistake, if you acted out of habit and kind of mindlessly did something like if, you take up the wrong set of keys and, take out your car keys when you mean to take out a door key or something like that, talking with kids about that and saying, oh, you know what, my brain was kind of going on autopilot there for a minute, and I wasn't stopping and thinking about what my goal is right now. You can actually talk with kids about how it's part of what's happening in their brain and mind in development when they have some of their own executive function issues or failures. Even showing brain anatomy. And that can be very fascinating for young kids to see pictures of the brain or models, three-dimensional models of the brain, start to talk about the development of prefrontal cortex, the frontmost part of your brain, and how it takes a long time to develop that. And, starting to talk with kids about what are some things that we can do to help develop this part of our brain. what are some of the games that we can do, some of the activities that we can try to help develop that part of our brain.
So just to be clear, executive function would be located in the frontal lobe of the brain, right?
Yeah, I mean, not exclusively. So there are also some midbrain involvement, certainly in executive function, and it's really a whole brain process. But yes, primarily executive function is associated with the prefrontal cortex, and impairments in executive function are closely associated with damage to prefrontal cortex, or a lesion, a stroke that's located in that region of the brain, and so forth. So, we have been able to see a very close correlation between prefrontal cortex and these executive function skills, such that if that part of the brain is damaged or underdeveloped, then these skills will also in turn be underdeveloped.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam, for your question. Lucia has a question about neurofeedback. Do you have any indication that neurofeedback works or is effective to improve executive function, Stephanie?
There is some evidence, especially in older adults, that neurofeedback can be helpful. I think the principle there makes a lot of sense in that you're giving the person, patient, whatever, the opportunity to reflect on their thoughts, actions, and feelings. And when you tie that to some kind of a physical or biological sign or indicator, such as your brain waves, if you're showing, just kind of an EEG scan of what's happening in the brain currently. But it's the same principle with heart disease and using biofeedback to teach the patient about how their heartbeat changes according to different conditions. And with that additional feedback, you get the opportunity again to reflect more on, I see that when I start to feel anxious, I see that my heart rate is increasing or something like that. The same kind of principle applies with neurofeedback, where I think we can learn we can teach others to detect these patterns and how they go together with certain conditions. So, I can see that when I'm really concentrating and really focusing my attention, I can see that this is the pattern that's happening in my brain. And you can actually shape kids, individuals, you can shape them over time to have that more desirable, focused, to have the pattern of brain activity that is associated with greater attentional focus. And if you give them a visual aid like that, it can be even more effective.
Okay, great. And Stephanie, for those viewers that just may not be familiar with neurofeedback, can you just quickly explain what it is?
Sure. So the idea is that you'd be hooked up to some kind of EEG monitor that's an electroencephalogram. And so these are electrodes that are picking up off of the electrical activity coming off of the scalp. So there's nothing being put into the brain in this technique. It's just detecting or picking up on the naturally occurring electrical activity that's coming off of our scalps all the time as we think and act throughout the day. And so it's just highly sensitive and able to pick up on that and turn that into an image on a screen of your brainwave patterns. And so if you're doing a task, like, trying to focus on or learn a new activity on a computer screen, and then there might be another screen next to that is showing your brainwave pattern. So the idea is that you can start to notice that, when I'm really concentrating on this, I'm starting to see that, and the technician can help you identify this, I'm seeing this particular pattern of brain activity, and that's the desirable pattern. And then you can start to kind of shape the activities through exercises and sessions of neurofeedback to amplify the likelihood that you're going to see that more desirable kind of brainwave pattern that's associated with greater attentional focus, if attentional focus is the issue.
Right, and not to belabor this, but like these neurofeedback games, am I correct when I say that I think they've shown some improvement while the individual is playing the game itself, but we're not seeing that it generalizes into everyday life. Is that correct?
Yeah, there has been some concern that over practicing certain games that say foster spatial working memory. So, playing asteroid-like games on a computer can certainly improve your ability to perform well on spatial memory tasks. There are also some carryover effects on visual cognition, aspects of visual cognition, that there are some positive transfer effects there. But I think some of the transfer effects that we're looking for with those kinds of exercises would be in daily living. You would want to see that improving your working memory in the context of a game like this has carryover effects into remembering to do your homework on time. And unfortunately, we're not seeing such a direct connection yet with that kind of intervention.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. Thank you, Lucia, for your question. Lau has a question. When a teenage child says to you, "No, I don't want to try that," should a parent insist that they do, or should a teacher insist that they do? Do you have a feeling on that, Stephanie?
That's a tough one, because I've had teenagers as well, and they can kind of have you over a barrel with that, just refusing to try something. So, one thing to think about as it relates to executive function is fostering a sense of inquiry, fostering a sense of curiosity is a good way to help set up kids for success in this arena. So if you're curious, then you want to know how something works, or you want to know how something's going to turn out. You want to learn a new skill. The curiosity can carry you pretty far in terms of enduring some of the less pleasant aspects of learning a new skill. Like if you're learning how to surfboard, and I speak from experience, it's really, really hard to learn how to do it, and you can become discouraged very quickly. I think trying again and again and persevering in the face of challenges like that is a lot easier if you have a sense of curiosity. And the same kind of thing with, say, an obstinate teenager. If you could figure out how to spark their curiosity around something, they're much more likely to volunteer to do it, or to at least stick with it when it gets hard.
Okay, great. Thank you for your question, Lau. SCJ is a 16-year-old with executive functioning issues and wants to improve with transitioning between activities. He's not very good at multitasking. So do you have any strategies for a 16-year-old who can get from one task to the next without too much of a struggle?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think breaking tasks down into smaller bites or chunks is one strategy that helps a lot of kids who struggle with that. Looking at the task before you, maybe it's a whole problem set for math homework or something like that. But breaking it into some smaller chunks and building in some rewards can really help too. So I'm gonna do 5 of these, and then I'm gonna switch to an activity that's more enjoyable for me, or I'm gonna switch, even to another subject for homework. And come back to this one, and setting yourself up for a couple of those opportunities and challenges to engage in some task switching. But I think it's really important to build in those more rewarding activities as well. And then when you break it down into smaller tasks, it doesn't seem so overwhelming. And then you start to kind of, feel bad about yourself that you didn't, yet again, you didn't accomplish what you had set out to accomplish.
Great. Okay, thanks. And thanks, SCJ, for your question. Kit wants to know best ways to, I guess, help someone understand that executive function skills are more than, or I would say different than, ADHD. Can you distinguish between the two, Stephanie?
Sure. So, executive function is something that we all have, we all develop. It's a normative aspect of brain and cognitive and even social and emotional development. And so ADHD is, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is diagnostic label that's given to a set of symptoms where executive function is specifically impaired or delayed. And so it's just a normative aspect of development, but it can go awry or it can be delayed or impaired. And that can result in a constellation or kind of a family of symptoms, such as inattention, poor inhibitory control, maybe small working memory capacity, not able to hold very many things in mind at once or remember your goal or stay on task, and inflexibility. So not being able to shift flexibly between tasks or between perspectives. And when that's not developing normally or in line with age expectations, it can be concerning, obviously, to families, and and then a diagnosis of ADHD might occur. But it's really a small, subset of this much broader umbrella of executive function development and skills.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, Stephanie, and thank you, Kit. Uncle has a question. Some teachers I work with don't see the importance of implementing interventions for kids who need them. So this is a general question, Stephanie. What can Uncle say to the teachers that aren't implementing the proper interventions for their students?
Part of this is that we're still doing a lot of education of educators around executive function. And so I would say, whatever resources or things that you could point out to the teacher or team of teachers about, hey, this is a real thing. It's not necessarily about or restricted to academic skills. So sometimes difficulty in math is not just about difficulty in math. It's also about some issues with executive function. And so I think there's a lot of, we, in my work, certainly try to do a lot of educating about that and thought leadership about the importance of executive function for academic skills and learning. But, we're still in the process of teaching teachers about that.
I just want to mention that we have so many resources about executive function on the understood.org website, many of which Stephanie was very instrumental in creating and reviewing. So please do a search on our site. Maybe we can put the link to our deep dive, Understanding Executive Functioning, and please share that with those who you may not think understand well enough to implement the right sort of interventions for your child or student. So thank you, Stephanie, for that, and thank you, Uncle, for your question. Lori has a question. I'm going to read through it. All right. After a terrible freshman year and the school denying to help, Lori was finally able to get the school to provide services for her daughter, but only for anxiety, not for ADHD. She did better during her sophomore year because she saw her caseworker daily, but did not get any help with her executive functioning skills. Parent kept asking for them. They've lowered her days with her caseworker, for next year, and she can't depend on the school to help any longer, she feels. So is there anything that you can say to this parent about her newly diagnosed 18-year-old daughter?
Yeah. So I think it's especially challenging when a diagnosis comes late. And I have met so many parents who have just said, I wish I knew about this earlier. I wish that the school knew about this earlier. And, we could have started some of these therapies and strategies earlier. So that's just one thing I just want to point out. And I hope that this thought leadership and education will start to change that. I would point again to understood.org as a resource for this parent because they in turn have a lot of referrals and resources for children of all ages for additional supports around executive function. I would applaud you for advocating for your child with this school. If it's a university or high school, I wasn't exactly sure which, but certainly it's something that college campuses need to be aware of as well. So many, and of course, as a university professor, I see this as well. A lot of the learning difficulties that my own students have are, again, it's not intelligence, it's executive function issues. And so I'd like to see college campuses also become more aware of and have more resources around this in their student disabilities, services offices as well.
Right. And thank you.
I hope you find the resources you need.
Right. And thank you for clarifying that, executive functioning issues is not an issue of intelligence.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. So there is a relation between, an overlap between executive function and intelligence, but there are a few key differences. So one is that executive function most closely overlaps with what we call fluid intelligence. So it's, the how of thinking rather than the what, or the content or knowledge part, which is called crystallized intelligence. So it does overlap with fluid intelligence, but it's different in a few key respects too. And one is in terms of the plasticity. So we think of executive function as being highly changeable and malleable, and really intervenable, if you will. Whereas the traditional conceptualization of intelligence is that it's something that's fixed, and that it's like your destiny throughout life. This is really not at all the case with executive function.
Okay, great. We're running out of time, and I'm just going to one more question, Stephanie. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to as many of the questions that were submitted. Of course, you could always go to our Understood community at u.org/community and post your questions there, and we can have an expert take a look at them and respond, as well as other parents. So Amy asks, what type of activities can be done with kids to help them increase their working memory and cognitive flexibility?
So these would have to be age appropriate, activities and kind of age tailored. But there are a few key things to keep in mind. Activities that are fun, so things that are enjoyable and are satisfying kids' curiosity, like we talked about earlier. That's one thing that will keep them engaged as well. Opportunities for play. Again, you have to think about the age, but imaginative play and opportunities for that, having props around for dress-up play, encourages kids to take different perspectives, and that helps build their cognitive flexibility. Project-based learning, so having projects either at home or in school that take a while, things that aren't going to be done in 20 minutes or even a day, but that you have to work on over a series of days or even weeks. Projects that take a little more time have built-in sequences of, first we need to do this. First we need to lay the foundation. Then we need to do that. That helps kids, again, persevere and keeping something in mind for a longer period of time and working toward a long-term goal rather than having some kind of immediate gratification. Those are just a couple of strategies.
Okay, that's great. And I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. These have been great questions. Thank you so much for being with us today, Stephanie. It's always great to have you.
Thank you so much.
And for our viewers, thank you again for joining. If you have missed any portion of this chat or would like to watch it again, we archive all of our chats at u.org/calendar. Thanks again for being with us, and have a great afternoon.